the sex abuse scandals were paid for in large part by, guess who? Harvey Weinstein. Harvey paid for the legal fees of Bill Clinton during the sex abuse scandals. And to show you where this all comes in, the fallout from this, the very first fallout that may come in, is the fact that Michael Moore's new film, his anti-Trump documentary that he called Fahrenheit 11/9, and of course that is a reversal of his previous documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11. They were going to call it Fahrenheit 11/9 because that was the day after the country elected Trump president. So they'd already weaponized a documentary that they were getting ready to come out with, and that may be at risk because that's the way these guys operate. As I said before, for the longest period of time, and it was things like the Frankfurt School at Columbia University where Hillary Clinton may be going, it was that collusion between Marxists and Hollywood that created the Red Scare, that created the House Un-American Activities Committee, that then turned into a witch hunt. Nevertheless, there was substance at the core of that. They were using Hollywood and they were using their capability in movies to change the culture, to push their political agenda. And people like Michael Moore and Quentin Tarantino are perfect examples of this, especially the films of Quentin Tarantino. He does it in a very subtle way. It's not as ham-fisted and in your face as Michael Moore's documentaries. Quentin Tarantino does it with his entertainment. He says he's stunned and heartbroken, and he's still processing the Weinstein mess. And I say, yeah, that's the way I felt when I went to see his films. I was stunned, heartbroken, and it took me a while to process the mess of Quentin Tarantino's films. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight.
Mineral Fusion. Visit InfoWarsLife.com to secure your canister. We have worked for years with our chemists and scientists to create the most
estimated time in traffic, 15 minutes.
The Patriot, weighing down Army and systems. The same 300.
The gif of Hillary Clinton when she was being interviewed and she turned around and looked at that woman and started, twitching her head really strange for a very long time. Remember that? Everybody saying, what kind of a neurological issue has she got? Hillary courses, how about this one? A vast right-wing conspiracies and you. Another one, how to blame friends and take down enemies. There's so many that she could do, but of course, what she's going to do is be at the forefront of cultural Marxism, of Hollywood, and the Marxist left. And that's why the juncture of Hillary and her friend Harvey Weinstein, who paid for Bill's sexual assault defense. And then she's out there saying, look at Trump, don't look at us. Look at the Russians. There's that, if you're watching, there's that gif of her. That's interpretive twitching. That may be one of her courses. But let's take a look at President Trump. Because as I said earlier, what he did at the end of the week last week was to finally get in line in a very strong and independent way to push for the agenda that he won on and to connect again with the voters who put him in office. And I believe, and others do as well, that the real turning point was what happened with Judge Roy Moore, the replacement election for Jeff Sessions as senator. Of course, it was not, the general election hasn't happened yet, but it was the primary in a heavily Republican state. So it was the establishment pushing Luther Strange. It was the establishment spending $32 million to destroy the character of Judge Roy Moore. And it was Judge Roy Moore, outspent by more than 10-1, who slammed the establishment. And if you remember, it was the Friday before the election on Tuesday. President Trump went down to Alabama. He had been told by the GOP establishment to endorse Luther Strange, who had been appointed by a governor who had to leave office because of ethical issues. Luther Strange was the attorney general who was investigating him at the time. That raised some real issues. And of course, there were other ethical issues, but he was also a creature of the establishment. He was a creature of Mitch McConnell. And I think it was the final lesson for President Trump that he would be associated with a loser. And that was a bit much for him, I think. He went down there and he started to give a speech and say, well, this is why I was told this about Luther Strange. I was told that about Luther Strange. And of course, Luther Strange had taken the stage before President Trump had gotten there. And people were jeering at him and telling reporters, I hate this guy. I came to hear President Trump. And when President Trump came out, he said, well, I was told this and that about Luther Strange. But, maybe I made a mistake. And both of these guys are good. And whichever one of them wins the Republican primary, I'll support in the general election. And then over the weekend, it was either on a Sunday or Monday before the election on Tuesday, Vice President Pence went down there and he gave a very serious, impassioned endorsement of Luther Strange. He didn't get the message that this guy was going to lose, that this guy was an establishment guy. And quite frankly, I think many in the conservative Christian wing of the Republican Party saw rightfully that what Pence had done was to throw their interests and their candidate under the bus to support an establishment GOP candidate. Pence has always affiliated himself with the evangelical wing, but even more strongly with the establishment wing. And so after President Trump did a little bit of talking about the race and saying, maybe I made a mistake, I'll endorse whoever wins this, that's when he began the NFL situation. He changed the subject. And he changed it in a way that he was with the people. But now I think he's learned the lesson, and he, in a short period of time, has come out swinging for his agenda. As Yahoo News puts it, in a sudden flurry, Trump looks to deliver for his voters. And they say U.S. President Donald Trump is going it alone. Yes, he is. And that's a good thing. They said after weeks, and I would say it's not weeks. It's been months of this happening. When President Trump came in, he did a couple of things right away. He got out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but I think he tried to work with the establishment. And maybe that's why he's got the kind of cabinet that he has there. Maybe he's trying to work with the establishment. Maybe he's going to realize that the Trump cabinet is opposing him as well. But say after weeks of seeing his agenda imperiled by Republican divisions and infighting among his aides, Trump has had a whirl of activity this last week, reasserting his campaign priorities, trying to deliver wins for his fervent but frustrated base of supporters. He took steps to dramatically undercut Obamacare health system. He sent notice that he was willing to scuttle the nuclear deal with Iran. He moved to roll back coal plant limits and again demanded a wall along the Mexican borders. And on social media, the president appeared to relish his feuds with the news media, with senior Republicans in Congress, and with the NFL. In a sense, it was the freewheeling Trump, throwing red meat to his voter base, following his gut, haranguing his critics. And one Republican strategist said Trump knows that he has to make good on several of his campaign promises. The clock is ticking, and Congress is useless. And large portions of his base are growing frustrated. And now he has delivered, I believe. When we look at what's going on, let's take a look at Obama, because this is a key thing. Two parts of this. We're going to have Jerome Corsi join us in the next hour, and he's going to talk about one aspect of this, which is something that he had advocated very clearly, something that the Trump administration has now done. Finally, the Department of Justice has said this is unlawful. The way the Obamacare subsidies are being funded is unlawful, and of course that agrees with the findings of a court, as well as with the Republican Congress. They sued in court to say, you can't do this, we didn't appropriate the money, and the court agreed with them. And then the Eric Holder Obama Department of Justice appealed, and we kept saying all along, hey, all they have to do is stop the appeal. Well, they've done that now, and now they have stopped the illegal, unconstitutional funding of the Obamacare subsidies. But they point out that on all of these, as we look at this, we've got Daily Mail and the Washington Post talking about the dismantling of Obama's legacy, or the undermining of Obamacare. And I have to say, why is Obama's legacy so important that we can't dismantle it? And did they ever accuse Obama of dismantling the legacy of law, of our economy, of our health care, of our Constitution? See, Obama's policies dismantled all of those. That was his legacy. And so why wouldn't we take that apart? And the Daily Mail says, well, brick by brick, the demolition job has begun. Whether it's climate, trade, healthcare, immigration, or foreign policy, President Trump is dismantling Obama's legacy. Yes. And it is easy to do because Obama never bothered to follow the law. That's why President Trump on the very first day could say, we're not going to do Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was something that he never got ratified by the Congress. That's why he could say, we're going to pull out of the climate agreement out of Paris, because it was something that Obama said, I'm going to self-ratify. When he got into Obamacare, he said, I can't get Congress to fund it, so I'm just going to steal the money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac investors. So it's very easy to dismantle the legacy of unconstitutional, unlawful actions that we inherited from Obama. But then Van Jones has this to say. Let's go out with this clip from Van Jones.
Listen, I've never seen a president of the United States willing to hurt Americans to get his way. Willing to have Americans be sick, willing to have Americans, possibly lose their lives, watch their children with conditions because he wants to get his way. I haven't seen that before. I agree with you that our healthcare system needs to continue to be improved and changed. I support the progressive cause. I'm willing to listen to actual conservatives.
We're going to pick up with that when we come back, because he just said President Trump is willing to hurt people. Is he hurting people? Did Obama hurt people? We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Thyroid. Not all parent. Obama was willing to take investors' money. He called it a net asset sweep. We call it theft. He was willing to take investors' money illegally to fund Obamacare. He was willing to hold a gun to your head and force you to pay premiums that in many people's cases have more than doubled now in the 4 years. He's willing to do that, to hurt people in that way, so that he could help the insurance companies that wanted Obamacare. He's willing to put entire energy sectors out of business, entire industries out of business, and of course make sure that your energy prices go through the roof, so he could help certain companies like Solyndra and so forth. So we're going to take a look at this. And was Obamacare really an act of compassion, or was it an act of coercion? Of course, I think you know the answer, but we're going to spell it out for you when we come back here. I've got to take a quick break and tell you about some of the sales at InfoWarsStore.com. It's what funds this program, what funds our operation here. And we have seen milligram, the biggest water filter in America. Enter the code WAKEUP at checkout. Let's go back to this Van Jones progressive cost, a site that will go through and explain things in depth to people. This is Jeffrey Tucker's article. He says the scandalous truth about Obamacare is laid bare. And I want you to pull up the picture of that article, because there's a picture of a guy in a three-piece suit. In one hand, he's got a pen, and in the other hand, he's got a gun. And that sums it up right there, folks. That's the bureaucracy holding a gun to your head and forcing you to sign on the dotted line for healthcare that you don't choose to have. And he points out, looks at the reaction of the mainstream press as they're melting down about this. He says, this is a government program that has been ruined by permitting people to have choice. That's what they're essentially saying. He says, you got a government program like that, it is not sustainable. He says it's not just that Obamacare is financially unsustainable, and it isn't if you remove that component where Obama decided that he would unilaterally, illegally, unconstitutionally just seize money from certain accounts that he had access to, because he didn't want to wait for Congress to allocate the funds. No, it's not just that it's financially unsustainable. It's not just that it's illegal, but he points out that it is intellectually unsustainable. It's come to an end with President Trump's executive order, but he says, what does it do? Well, it cuts subsidies to failing providers. That's what President Trump's executive order does. He says it also redefines the meaning of short-term policies from 1 year to 90 days. And in the words of USA Today, the executive order permits a greater range of choice, quote, by allowing more consumers to buy health insurance through association health plans across state lines. And what he points out is that is the fatal death knell to Obamacare. Allowing. Say, that is the harsh reality that we've been struggling with. The idea that was taken to the Supreme Court. And everybody said, you cannot mandate that we buy a product from private providers. That's taking crony capitalism, or fascist economics, if you will, because that is true fascism. That is economic fascism, to force us to buy somebody's product. And they said, no. We're going to call it a tax. And that's what Roberts did after he had already written the opinion saying, no, there's no constitutional authority to mandate that we buy products from anybody. You can't do that constitutionally. And then he wrote the other side of it, interestingly enough, and we've speculated as to why he might have done that. And in the coming years, we have seen revelations saying, yeah, the NSA and other people were looking at Supreme Court justices' emails and communications as well. Is there something that is blackmailable? I don't know. But anyway, the point is that Jeffrey Tucker in fee.org points out that allowing choice defeats the core feature of Obamacare. Because allowing choice defeats the core feature of Obamacare, which is about forcing risk pools to exist that the market otherwise never would have chosen. The problem is that allows more freedom. And the mainstream press is furious about this. The New York Times, Fox, Atlantic, CNBC says it could lead healthy people who don't need comprehensive benefits to sign up in large numbers for short-term coverage. What's the problem with that? And he points out, can you imagine letting people do things that are personally beneficial to them? Can't have that. Can't have that from the Democrats. Can't have that from the quote-unquote Affordable Health Care Act. He says the ugly truth about Obamacare is now laid bare. Obamacare didn't create a market. It destroyed the market. Even the slightest bit of freedom wrecks the entire scheme. That's the whole point. Obamacare was never a program to improve medical coverage. It was never a program to make things more affordable. You're only going to get things more affordable if you allow competition. It was a program for redistributing wealth by force and from the healthy people to the sick. That is the essence of it. So it's a very important thing that President Trump moved unilaterally to do this, taking the recommendation of Rand Paul to say we're going to allow competition, taking the recommendation of Jerome Corsi to say shut down the illegal funding of it. We're going to talk to Jerome Corsi at the bottom of the next hour. But when we come back, we're going to play some clips from President Trump after the news break at the top of the hour. We're going to play some clips from him. And I think one of the finest speeches that President Trump has ever given. It really hits on the core issues. Men, give your body the support it needs with InfoWars Life Prostagard. It's time to start assisting the body in regulating proper prostate balance. InfoWars Life has set out to bring you formulations that are not only the highest quality out there, but formulas that you can use on a daily basis to give your body the natural herbs and extracts that our experts recommend. The Prostagard formula does just that, with its mixture of plant-based nutrients and antioxidants that help give your body total.
Orders above.
Does not seem likely when they're only able to produce a couple hundred in a given quarter. But there's another shoe that is about to drop. As we see, governments across Europe and certain cities like Paris saying they're going to ban all internal combustion engines, and they're going to do it within by 2030, or they're going to ban all diesel and gasoline engines by 2040. What are they going to replace it with? Where is the infrastructure that is going to allow people to charge their cars? And frankly, I don't really care what powers our cars. I mean, I'd be perfectly willing to have an electric car, but that's being used as a beard to get people to accept other controls on their car. What they really want to do is foist upon you a government-controlled robot car. And remember, a robot comes from the Czech word for slave. So these are slave cars. Whose slave are these cars? Well, they're slaves of the government. And if you ride in them, you will be slaves of the government as well. So maybe we ought to call them, instead of robocars, we ought to call them slave cars.
Police report ahead.
This vision of clean energy that everybody has for electric cars, they use that as a beard to bring in the control and the elimination of human drivers and the elimination of private ownership. That's a key part with the electric cars, because they're going to be very expensive and nobody wants to buy these cars. In France, they only have 1% of the people who are choosing to buy this, in spite of heavy government subsidies. So what do? The government comes in because this fits their control grid. And again, just as we see with Obamacare, you like your car, you can keep your car, right? That's what they're going to tell everybody. Just like if you liked your insurance policy, you can keep your insurance policy. And yet the lesson in Obamacare should be that with a stroke of a pen and with a gun loaded in your face, the government can take away fundamental things that you take for granted, fundamental freedoms and liberties, and they can substitute for it mandates. And that's something that should concern all of us. But there's another thing that may be an obstacle in the way of these people. Even though we don't have the political will and the public understanding of what is about to take place, there is a practical issue. As Zero Hedge points out, there are 2.7 trillion reasons why Tesla won't rule the world. And of course, they're talking about Tesla because they're focusing on electric vehicles here. And they're saying, well, in spite of the fact that they have now laid off nearly 10% of their workforce, while they're still trying to gear up their assembly line, you would think it'd be going the other way around. They said, however, they have burned through a ridiculous amount of cash in just the last couple of quarters. But the government continues to subsidize Tesla with the purchase of other vehicles. As you buy other internal combustion cars, then you're going to pay a tax. That tax is then going to go to Tesla, because that's the way it's kind of like the corporate average fuel economy. If the government doesn't meet those, if the company doesn't meet those goals, then they have to pay a separate tax. And if they don't sell enough electric vehicles, then they got to purchase credits from Tesla. So that's how Tesla makes their money. That's really their business model. But it's going to come crashing down, as Morgan Stanley points out, that the forecast of 526 million electric vehicles operating globally by 2040 means that they're going to have to spend $2.7 trillion building a charging infrastructure. And guess who's going to get charged? You will. You'll be charged by the governments who want to push this on you, not because you choose to do it, but because they choose to have you do business this way, just like Obamacare. And it is going to be far more intrusive than even Obamacare.
This flavor is
David Knight.
Are addressing to anybody who holds to Christian values and has the audacity to exercise their First Amendment, both of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But here's President Trump at the Value Voters Summit.
And we stand united behind the customs, beliefs, and traditions that define who we are as a nation and as a people. George Washington said that Religion and morality are indispensable to America's happiness, really prosperity, and totally to its success. It is our faith and our values that inspires us to give with charity, to act with courage, and to sacrifice for what we know is right. The American founders invoked our Creator 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. 4 times. How times have changed, but you know what? Now they're changing back again. Just remember that. Benjamin Franklin reminded his colleagues at the Constitutional Convention to begin by bowing their heads in prayer. Religious liberty is enshrined in the very First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. And we all pledge allegiance to, very, very beautifully, one nation under God. This is America's heritage, a country that never forgets that we are all, every one of us, made by the same God in heaven. When I came to speak with you last year, I made you a promise. Well, one of the promises I made you was that I'd come back. See? And I don't even need your vote this year. Well, that's even nicer. But I pledged that in a Trump administration, our nation's religious heritage would be cherished,
Police report
protected,
ahead.
and defended like you have never seen before. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. You see it every day. You're reading it. So this morning, I'm honored and thrilled to return as the first sitting president to address this incredible gathering of friends, so many friends.
All right, and as you heard him talk about Christian values there, unashamedly referring to George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, who would have thought that we'd have a situation in America where you have to think about the fact that there are going to be people who are shaming you because you refer to George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. And that's exactly what Tony Perkins, the president of the organization that had him there, the president of Family Research Council, said. He said, Trump's greatest impact is legitimizing those people and views that have been marginalized. He said, Obama used the bully pulpit and the courts to demonize those who held to the very values that made America great. Trump is doing exactly the opposite. And I would say to you that the legacy of Obama are the anti-fascists, the Antifa, and the people who are defacing, defiling, and destroying the monuments of this country. George Washington, Christopher Columbus, and others. Perkins went on to say, what the president and his administration can do is once again make people feel like it's okay to stand up and talk about traditional values and engage in these conversations. Then we can win hearts and minds, and that's when the transformation begins. And let me tell you how deeply we are into this. The campaign to shame people, to use any kind of connection to race or racism. And as I pointed out before, you want to lay that at Christopher Columbus's feet? Fine. But you also have to lay it at the feet of the indigenous people, because they were also involved in wars. They also had slaves. Every culture, every civilization has had slaves. And we look at this latest result here. Here's Biloxi, Mississippi. They're going to pull To Kill a Mockingbird because it makes people uncomfortable. And yet that is a novel that at its core, it's that, what President Trump was just saying, that we're all God's children, that all men are created equal. That was the basic message of To Kill a Mockingbird. But it makes people uncomfortable because maybe it says, expresses the racism of certain people in a certain way, or maybe, like we saw at the Planned Parenthood protest, we would be accused of being white saviors if we were to try to save black children from abortion. If we were out there saying, this is black genocide, wake up. Then they accused us, the Antifa people that were there said, you're nothing but white saviors. It's like, well, if a savior is needed, you shouldn't really care about what skin color it comes in. And, when we look at the message of To Kill a Mockingbird, I mean, that is a very compelling piece of film. And I think, when we look at the ability of Hollywood to change hearts and minds, it can be used in a positive way, but it hasn't been used in a positive way for a very long time. It has been used to push a Marxist agenda. It can be used very effectively. Quite frankly, when I look at something like To Kill a Mockingbird, it was something that had a profound effect on me. I know that the government's policies to overturn other local government policies of Jim Crow laws, when the federal government came in and started mandating things here and there, that really kind of galvanized people. I grew up in the South. I saw people push back against that and say, they can't tell me what I can and cannot do with my private property. And I think it was counterproductive for the government to come in and do that type of thing. Yes, they could have stopped and should have stopped and did stop the Jim Crow laws, because that was government coming in and drawing a red line around things. But to take over private property rights, that had a negative effect on people. But what had a positive effect, what really changed hearts and minds, were things like To Kill a Mockingbird. But now we can't read it because some people are offended by it. I'm David Knight. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Out the consultation.
Harvest Right. Politico says that it is the dawn of the Evangelical Nationalist Alliance. No, it's not. It's not the dawn. It was that alliance that put President Trump into office, not the Russians. Newsflash to Politico. We're going to get back to the speech that President Trump gave at the Value Voters. We're going to take a look at the other ways that President Trump has connected in the last couple of days of last week, last Thursday and Friday. He's connected. He's taken